The rain did not come suddenly. It did not roar down from the heavens all at once, nor did the winds howl in fury. Instead, the first drop fell with a quiet finality, darkening the dry earth beneath it. And then another, and another. A slow rhythm, like the tapping of unseen fingers upon the land. Noah stood at the entrance of the ark, feeling the moisture in the air. He closed his eyes, listening. The world outside was still alive. Crickets chirped, distant voices carried over the hills, and far in the distance, the torches of the city flickered like stars scattered across the valley. Life, unaware that its time had run out. For years he had warned them. For decades he had pleaded. And now, the hour had come. Welcome to the story of the night before the flood, a quiet yet profound moment in history where faith and obedience stand against the weight of an unbelieving world. This is a tale of waiting, of final prayers, of a family on the edge of the unknown. As the storm gathers, Noah and his loved ones prepare to leave behind everything they have ever known, stepping into a future written by the hand of God. Let the sound of the rain and the unfolding journey guide you into rest. Noah turned, stepping into the ark. The air inside was thick with the scent of wood and animals, hay and oil, sweat and labor. The massive door stood open behind him, a final invitation to any who might yet change their minds. But no one came. Shem, his eldest, approached, his expression weary. "It's time, Father." Noah nodded but lingered. His heart was heavy. Even now, a part of him hoped that anyone would appear at the entrance, breathless and repentant, begging for entry. But the path remained empty. They would not come. And soon the door would close forever. "Gather the family," Noah murmured. "We pray together before we seal the ark." Shem hesitated. His dark eyes flickered toward the outside world, toward the people who laughed at them, cursed them, ignored them. "They still don't believe." "No," Noah said quietly. "They do not." He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "But we believe. And that is enough." Shem nodded, though his jaw was tight, his fists clenched. Noah could see the anger beneath his quiet obedience. Shem had endured the mockery for years. He had grown up beneath the weight of his father's calling, watching their family become outcasts. And now, when all was about to be proven true, there would be no satisfaction in it. Only sorrow. Noah stepped forward into the heart of the ark, where his family was waiting. His wife, Naamah, stood near the great wooden beams, adjusting a bundle of hay. Her hands were steady, but he knew her heart was troubled. Japheth, his youngest, sat beside one of the water barrels, sharpening a knife absent-mindedly. He was always quiet, always listening. He glanced up as Noah approached but said nothing. And then there was Ham, his middle son, standing near the edge of the open door, staring out at the world he would never see again. Ham's expression was unreadable. His shoulders were rigid, his fingers twitching against his sides. Noah knew that look, knew the battle waging inside him. Ham had never doubted the flood would come. No, his battle was not against belief. It was against acceptance. "This is the last time we will see them," Ham murmured. His voice was flat, almost hollow. Noah didn't respond right away. He stepped beside his son, following his gaze. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting golden reflections across the water wells, the rooftops, the streets. Laughter rang out, faint but there. People were celebrating, feasting, drinking. The world danced, unaware that its music was about to end. Ham exhaled sharply. Should we have done more? The question sat between them. Noah had asked himself that same question 1,000 times. Had he spoken loudly enough? Had he knocked on enough doors? Had he pleaded enough, begged enough? Perhaps not. But the time for questioning was over. "The Lord has given them every chance," Noah said at last. "And they have chosen." Ham's jaw tightened. Then quietly he said, "So have we." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the ark. Noah closed his eyes, steadying himself. Yes, they had chosen. And soon the world would understand the weight of its own choices. With a deep breath, Noah turned away from the open door and joined his family at the center of the ark. They knelt together. And as Noah lifted his hands in prayer, another raindrop fell. Then another. And another. Chapter 2, The Final Preparations. The sound of rain grew steadier, a rhythmic pattering against the wooden beams of the ark. It was not yet a downpour, but it was enough to send a shiver through Noah's bones. His family knelt in the dim light of flickering oil lamps, the scent of burning wick mingling with the earthy smell of damp wood. Noah's hands trembled slightly as he raised them in prayer. His voice, though steady, carried a weight heavier than ever before. "Lord of the heavens and the earth," he began, "you have spoken, and your word is true. You have called us to this purpose, and we have obeyed. We stand in your mercy, and we trust in your will." His sons bowed their heads, their wives clutching their hands. Naomi's fingers pressed tightly into Noah's palm, her grip firm. The silence stretched as the prayer settled over them like a veil. Outside, the laughter of the city still rang, distant but present, a stark contrast to the heavy quiet within the ark. Noah exhaled slowly. Then, standing, he glanced at Shem. "It is time." Shem nodded and rose swiftly, moving toward the heavy wooden door. For the past 100 years, that door had been left open, an invitation, an offering of grace to any who would heed the warning. Now it would close forever. Ham and Japheth joined their brother at the threshold, their expressions unreadable. The great door stood tall, nearly twice their height, thick and heavy. It had taken weeks to carve it, to reinforce it, to ensure it would hold against the coming flood. But the final act of sealing it would not be theirs. Noah took one last step forward, standing before the entrance. He looked out one final time. The city glowed in the distance, warm and golden, oblivious. A few figures moved along the far ridge, pointing toward the sky where dark clouds gathered. Still they did not come. They would never come. Noah swallowed and whispered, "Lord, let your will be done." And then it happened. A deep, resonant groaning filled the air. The ark shuddered slightly. Then, before their eyes, the door began to move, not by any human hand, but by a force unseen. Shem and Japheth stepped back. Ham's breath caught audibly in his throat. The door creaked, inch by inch, closing in slow, deliberate movement. The light from the outside world narrowed into a sliver, then a thin line. Then, with a final, echoing boom, the ark was sealed. Darkness. For a long moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that presses against the chest, thick and suffocating. Then Japheth let out a breath. "It's done?" Noah turned, his hands still shaking, though he willed himself to remain steady. "Now we wait." His family exchanged glances. Ham's face was unreadable as he turned away, disappearing down the wooden corridor that led deeper into the ark. Naomi reached for Noah's arm, her touch warm. "Come," she murmured. "We should check on the animals." Noah nodded, though his thoughts lingered on the sealed door. They had crossed a threshold tonight, one that could never be undone. The waiting had begun. The ark was vast, stretching deep into the darkness, where rows upon rows of pens, cages, and enclosures lined the massive interior. The animals were restless. The rain had changed them, subtle shifts, small anxieties. Noah moved quietly through the pathways, brushing his fingers along the rough wooden beams, listening to the sounds of shifting hooves and the occasional rustle of wings. In the dim light, a pair of great lions lay curled in their enclosure, golden eyes blinking in the dark. Further down, a pair of doves cooed softly, nestled in their wooden roost. The sheer enormity of what had been accomplished struck him again. The years of work, of building, of gathering, every moment had led to this night. His sons moved through the space as well, checking water troughs, securing feed bins. The women carried baskets of grain, pouring rations into wooden containers. The ark was alive with quiet movement. And yet, through it all, Noah could feel something shifting in the air. Attention. He found Ham near the far end of the ark, standing beside the elephant pen, his fingers gripping the wooden railing. Noah hesitated before approaching. "You should rest." Ham didn't turn. "It's really happening?" "Yes." The younger man exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I don't know. Maybe until this moment, some part of me still thought, maybe it wouldn't come. Maybe the people would change their minds. Maybe." He cut himself off, clenching his jaw. Noah placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know." Ham turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Do you?" Noah searched his son's face and saw the same weight he himself had carried for years. The sorrow of knowing, of believing, and yet of longing for something different. Ham swallowed. "They were our people, Father. Our neighbors. Our friends." His voice was low, strained. "They're still out there, laughing, living. And in a few days, they'll be gone." A long silence stretched between them. Then Noah said quietly, it was never ours to decide. Shem let out a slow, unsteady breath. I know. He looked back at the rain, trickling now from the ceiling, seeping through the wooden seams. Do you think it will be quick? Shem asked. Noah didn't answer, because he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Hours passed. The rain had begun to thicken, no longer a gentle patter but a steady, rhythmic downpour. The sounds of the city had quieted. Inside the ark, most of the family had settled in for rest. The animals were still now, lulled by the steady hum of rainfall. Noah sat alone near one of the outer beams, listening to the night. His mind wandered, unbidden, to the faces of the people he had once known. The man who sold him lumber. The woman who used to weave garments for his family. The children who ran laughing through the markets. Would they knock? Would they come running to the ark when the waters began to rise? Would they scream his name? A deep, aching sorrow filled his chest. He closed his eyes. A new world was coming. But the cost of it would be great. Chapter 3. Memories of the Old World. Noah sat awake long after the others had drifted into sleep. The rain had become a steady roar against the ark's wooden walls, no longer a whisper but a voice. It spoke of the inevitable, of the judgment that had begun. And yet inside all was still. The animals stirred occasionally, shuffling hooves, the soft rustling of wings, the occasional yawn of a great beast settling into slumber. The deep groan of the wooden structure adjusting to the shifting air pressed against Noah's ears. But beyond all of that, beyond the weight of what was coming, his mind drifted to the past, to a world that would soon be gone. He remembered the smell of the earth after the harvest, the laughter of children running barefoot through the fields. He remembered the markets bustling with life, the voices calling out, the merchants haggling, the scent of fresh bread and ripened fruit. He remembered the sound of music. Lutes and harps, flutes and voices lifted in song. A world filled with color and sound and life. And now, in the quiet of the ark, it was slipping away. He thought of his father, Lamech, a man of quiet strength who had once walked these lands, who had spoken of the days before corruption had taken root. There was a time when men feared the Lord. His father had told him once as they sat beneath an old fig tree. A time when righteousness was not a rare thing but the way of life. Noah had been just a boy then, staring up at his father with wide eyes. Then what happened? Lamech had sighed, his gaze distant. Men stopped listening. Noah had spent his youth watching that truth unfold. As the years passed, the cities grew louder, the people bolder. Wickedness was not hidden in the shadows. It walked openly in the streets, unashamed. Men took what they wanted. The strong crushed the weak. The sacred was mocked. And in the midst of it all, Noah had built. He had laid the first beam of the ark with his own hands, under the open sun, with people jeering at him from the hillside. He had stood firm as they laughed, as they threw stones at his sons, as they cursed him, mocked him, called him mad. Where is this flood, old man? They would sneer. Where is the rain? They had pointed at the clear skies, at the golden sun, and laughed. Noah had continued building. For 100 years he had built, and not a single soul had believed. Father. The voice pulled him from his thoughts. Noah turned to see Japheth standing in the low lantern light, his expression cautious. You should rest, Japheth said. Noah managed a small smile. So should you? Japheth stepped closer, lowering himself onto the wooden floor beside his father. I tried, but my mind keeps wandering. Noah nodded knowingly. You're thinking about them. Japheth hesitated, then nodded. It's strange to know that they're still out there, living, laughing, as if nothing is wrong. He exhaled slowly. Do you think they will understand before it's too late? Noah's jaw tightened. I don't know, he admitted. Japheth lowered his gaze. I saw a man earlier today. He was standing on the hill, watching us as we loaded the last of the supplies. For a moment I thought he might come forward. But he didn't. He just turned and walked away. Noah said nothing. He had seen them too. The ones who hesitated. The ones who lingered near the edge of the fields, watching the ark with unreadable expressions. The ones who had almost believed. Almost. Noah rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. It is a strange thing, he murmured. To know what is coming, but to be unable to stop it. Japheth was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, Do you ever wish it were different? Noah turned to him. What do you mean? Japheth looked down at his hands. That things could have changed. That we wouldn't have to be here. That people would have listened and God would have spared them. Noah's chest ached at the question. Every day he had prayed for that outcome. Every day he had hoped. And yet here they were. Yes, Noah admitted quietly. I wish they had listened. Japheth exhaled, shaking his head. So do I. A long silence settled between them. Then, softly, Japheth said, It's starting, isn't it? Noah nodded. Yes. Japheth stood, glancing toward the walls. The rain was heavier now, the drops striking with more force, a steady drumbeat against the wooden frame. We should sleep while we can, Japheth said. Noah hesitated, but then he sighed. You're right. His son offered a small, tired smile. You taught me that, remember? A man cannot face tomorrow without resting in today. Noah chuckled softly. I suppose I did. Japheth patted his shoulder. Good night, father. Noah watched as his son disappeared down the corridor, his silhouette vanishing into the dim glow of the lanterns. He leaned back against the wall, letting out a slow breath. The old world was fading, and soon the rain would wash it away. Chapter 4: The Laughter of the Doubters. The rain had not yet driven them inside. Noah could still hear them, their laughter carrying through the night, distant yet unmistakable. Even with the sky darkening, even with the steady patter of rain growing heavier against the ark, the people had not left. For a moment he allowed himself to listen, not to their words but to their tone. They were amused as they had always been. Even as the world around them began to change, even as the ground grew slick beneath their feet, their confidence had not wavered. Not yet. Noah turned away from the door, stepping deeper into the ark's quiet interior. The wooden beams groaned under the shifting weight of animals stirring in their enclosures, their senses more attuned to the coming storm than the people outside. A heavy stillness hung in the air, despite the movement. He found Shem standing near the supply crates, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His jaw was set, but Noah could see the tension in his shoulders, the barely contained frustration beneath his controlled demeanor. They're still laughing, Shem said, his voice low. Noah nodded. They do not yet understand. Shem exhaled sharply through his nose. And when will they? When the water is at their ankles? Their knees? His grip tightened against his arms. Do they truly believe they are untouchable? Noah studied his son for a long moment. The frustration was warranted, but it was not what troubled him. You still want them to come, Noah observed. Shem's eyes flickered, a shadow of conflict passing over his face. He said nothing at first, but his silence was an answer in itself. Noah sighed, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. I want that too. Shem clenched his jaw. Then why won't they listen? Noah shook his head. Because they are afraid. Shem scoffed, shaking off his father's touch. Afraid? They don't seem afraid. They seem arrogant. Defiant. They are, Noah admitted. But arrogance is often a mask for fear. Shem frowned, his brows furrowing. I don't understand. Noah turned back toward the great wooden door, now sealed shut. He had spent a century with these people. He had known them, some as friends, some as enemies, all as neighbors. He had watched as their hearts hardened year after year, as they became deaf to the warnings that had once unsettled them. They mock us because they cannot bear to consider the alternative, Noah said softly. If they were to stop laughing, if they were to acknowledge that we were right, then they would have to face the truth. Shem looked at him, his expression unreadable. And the truth terrifies them more than the flood itself? Noah nodded. Yes. A heavy silence stretched between them. Shem exhaled, shaking his head. Then it's too late for them. Noah closed his eyes. Perhaps. Neither of them wanted to say it outright. That this was it. That the door would not open again. That they would hear the cries, the panic, the realization far too late to change anything. Shem rubbed a hand over his face. It doesn't feel like victory. Noah let out a quiet breath. It was never about victory, my son. Shem looked up at him, searching for something in his father's face. Understanding. Reassurance. Then what was it about? He asked. Noah placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. Obedience. Shem swallowed, then nodded. The wind outside shifted, rattling the wooden beams slightly. The storm was changing. And still the laughter echoed. Shem sat alone near the far end of the ark, staring at the wooden planks beneath him. His fingers drummed absent-mindedly against his knee, his mind clearly elsewhere. Noah approached quietly, lowering himself beside his son. "You're restless." Shem let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Wouldn't you be?" Noah didn't answer. Shem ran a hand through his hair, then exhaled sharply. "You hear them, don't you?" Noah nodded. Shem clenched his jaw. "They're still joking. Even now." It's as if... He hesitated, then shook his head. "No. Never mind. Speak your thoughts," Noah urged. Shem hesitated again, then met his father's gaze. "It's as if they don't believe the rain will last. As if they think this is nothing more than an unusual storm that will pass by morning." Noah's chest tightened. They had truly hardened their hearts. "They believe what they want to believe," Noah said. "Because the truth is too much to bear." Shem scoffed, looking away. "And when they realize the truth?" Noah didn't answer. Shem's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "How do we live with it?" Noah closed his eyes for a brief moment. "We remember why we are here. And we do not dwell on what we cannot change." Shem exhaled heavily. "That's easy for you to say." Noah turned to his son. "No, Shem. It is not." Shem looked at him, then searching his face, seeing, perhaps for the first time, the sorrow that Noah carried. And for the first time Shem did not argue. The hours stretched on. Outside, the wind howled through the darkness, the rain falling steadily now. It was not yet the flood, but it was no longer a simple storm. And still they laughed. Japheth joined his father near the lanterns, his face tired. "The animals are growing restless." Noah nodded. "They sense it coming?" Japheth hesitated. "And the people?" Noah turned toward the door. "Not yet." Japheth exhaled. "Will they?" Noah said nothing, because he wasn't sure. The laughter had not stopped. But soon it would. Soon the water would rise. Soon the voices would change. And soon the knocking would come. Noah closed his eyes. And he waited. Chapter 5. A Conversation with Shem. The ark groaned softly, shifting with the wind. The sound was deep, almost like the sigh of something ancient, something waiting. The rain drummed harder now, a steady rhythm against the thick wooden beams, and yet outside the world still carried on. Noah sat near the entrance, staring at the door that had sealed itself shut. Beyond it, beyond the veil of falling water, he knew life continued as it always had. The people still laughed, still mocked. They still did not understand. Shem entered quietly, his movements careful. The lantern light flickered as he stepped closer, his face drawn with the weight of too many unspoken thoughts. "You can't sleep either?" Noah asked, his voice quiet. Shem shook his head and settled onto the wooden floor beside his father. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Shem sighed. "It's really happening, isn't it?" Noah studied his son's face, seeing the tension there. Shem had always carried things differently than his brothers. He was not as quick-tempered as Ham, nor as quietly accepting as Japheth. Shem was thoughtful, measured, and that meant he often bore the weight of things far longer than he should. "Yes," Noah said. "It is." Shem exhaled, running a hand over his face. "I thought it would feel different." Noah raised an eyebrow. "How do you mean?" Shem hesitated. "For years I imagined this moment. The day the rain would come. The day they would finally see." He looked toward the door. "I thought I would feel relief. Maybe even satisfaction." Noah's stomach twisted. "But you don't?" Shem shook his head. "No, I don't." A silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the rain. Then Shem murmured, "They should have listened." Noah let out a slow breath. "Yes." Shem's jaw tightened. "We spent years building this ark. We spent years warning them. We gave them every chance to turn back." "Yes." "And yet they still..." He cut himself off, pressing his lips together. "I don't understand them, Father." Noah's chest ached at the frustration in his son's voice. "They have lived so long without consequence," Noah said gently. "They never believed judgment would come because for them it never has." Shem exhaled sharply. But how could they ignore what was right in front of them? The size of the ark alone should have made them think. He looked down at his hands, his fingers curled into fists. His voice broke slightly. "I wanted to save them." Noah reached out, gripping his son's shoulder. "So did I." Shem swallowed hard. "Then why didn't they listen?" Noah closed his eyes. He had asked himself this question 1,000 times. "I don't know," he admitted. Shem let out a slow, shaky breath. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." Noah squeezed his shoulder. No. But this is where we are. Shem nodded stiffly, his jaw clenched. For years they had watched the world slip further into darkness. They had seen the corruption, the violence, the defiance. And yet, in the end, it was not the wickedness that hurt the most. It was the indifference. The utter refusal to believe, even when the rain had already begun to fall. Shem turned toward his father, his voice quieter now. Do you think they will change their minds before it's too late? Noah hesitated. He had once believed so. No, I don't know, he said honestly. Shem looked away, his fingers tracing slow patterns against the wooden planks beneath them. And if they do, he asked. If they come to the ark, if they knock, what then? Noah's chest tightened. He had thought about this too. He had imagined the moment, if it would come. The pounding of fists against the door. The desperate voices calling his name. The cries of those who had waited too long. Noah exhaled, steadying himself. Then we pray. Shem's brow furrowed. But we can't open the door. Noah's stomach twisted. No. Shem looked toward the entrance again, his expression dark with realization. If they come, he murmured, they will die within arm's reach of safety. Noah closed his eyes. Yes. Shem sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the sealed door. Then he whispered, I hate this. Noah let out a slow breath. So do I. The rain fell harder. The wind began to shift. And the world continued laughing. For now. Chapter 6. The first distant thunder. The laughter was fading. Noah sat near the center of the ark, listening. The rain had grown heavier, its steady rhythm against the wooden beams now a constant presence. It had soaked into the ground, turning dust into mud, dampening the once lively streets of the city beyond. For the first time since the storm had begun, the world outside was growing quieter. And then, far in the distance, came the first low rumble of thunder. Noah exhaled slowly. It had begun. The air inside the ark was thick with the scent of animals, hay, and oil-burning lamps. The warm glow of the lanterns cast long shadows along the curved wooden beams, illuminating the vast space in flickering light. His sons moved quietly through the corridors, checking water supplies, tightening ropes, tending to restless creatures. There was a tension in the air, unspoken but understood. Shem stood near the far side of the ark, absently running his fingers along the wooden frame. His face was unreadable, but Noah could see the tension in his shoulders. You hear it, Noah said, stepping closer. Shem didn't look at him. Yes. The distant thunder rumbled again, rolling across the sky like the growl of something ancient waking from its slumber. Noah studied his son. It unsettles you. Shem let out a sharp breath, turning to face him. No, father. What unsettles me is how long it took. Noah frowned. Shem's gaze was intense, his voice low. The rain has been falling for hours. And yet, they still haven't come. Noah said nothing. Shem took a step closer. Why? Why are they still waiting? Noah met his son's gaze. Because they do not believe they need to be saved. Shem's jaw tightened. Not even now? Not yet. Shem exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. They're fools? Noah sighed. They are lost. Shem shook his head. No. They had every chance. Every warning. They laughed in our faces while we built this ark. Even as the rain began to fall, they still refused to see. He clenched his fists. They mocked you, father. Mocked us all. And now, when the waters rise, they will suffer for it. Noah studied his son carefully. And does that bring you peace? Shem hesitated. The ark creaked slightly as the wind outside shifted. The storm was changing, strengthening. Shem swallowed hard. Known his voice was quieter now. It doesn't. Noah reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Then do not let bitterness take root in your heart. Shem clenched his jaw. They don't deserve mercy. Noah's gaze was steady. Neither did we. Shem flinched. Noah softened his voice. We were spared because we listened. But we are no more worthy than they. A silence stretched between them. Then Shem muttered, I just don't understand why they won't come. Noah exhaled. Because fear is a strange thing. Shem frowned. What do you mean? Noah gestured toward the door. Some men refuse to believe until it is too late. And some believe but refuse to admit they were wrong. Shem let out a slow breath. Pride. Noah nodded. Pride. Shem stared at the door. So they will wait until the water is at their ankles? Perhaps. Until it's at their knees? Noah's chest ached. Perhaps. Shem shook his head. And when it's at their throats? Noah closed his eyes. Then they will understand. Another low roll of thunder filled the air. Shem exhaled sharply. I hate this. Noah sighed. So do I. The storm was growing. Noah could feel it in the air, thick with moisture and something deeper, something unseen. He moved through the ark, checking on the animals, running his hands along the wooden beams, listening to the world outside. The goats stirred restlessly in their pens. The doves fluttered in their cages, unsettled by the shifting pressure in the air. Even the great beasts, the lions, the oxen, the wild creatures, were still now, their instincts warning them of what the humans could not yet see. A storm unlike any before it. A judgment that could not be undone. Noah paused near one of the support beams, resting a hand against the wood. He had spent his entire life walking in obedience, trusting the unseen, holding fast to faith even when the world called him a fool. And now, standing on the threshold between the old world and the new, he felt the weight of it. Not fear, not doubt, but sorrow. The world outside was still laughing, still ignoring the growing flood beneath their feet. Soon the laughter would turn to something else. The first distant thunder had come. And soon the sky would break open. Chapter 7, Gathering His Family. The thunder rumbled again, closer this time. The sound rolled through the air like the footsteps of something vast and unseen, shaking the very bones of the earth. Noah stood near the center of the ark, gripping the wooden beam beside him. The rain had not stopped. It had only grown heavier, more insistent. The steady rhythm had turned into a downpour, and he could hear it now, pounding against the roof of the ark like a warning drum. It was time. He turned, scanning the vast wooden chambers where his family moved among the enclosures. The animals, restless but calm, had settled into the strange new rhythm of their temporary home. But Noah's family, they carried a different weight. His wife, Naamah, moved between the storage barrels, securing the last of their food supplies. She worked quickly, her hands steady, but he knew her mind was elsewhere. Japheth knelt near a trough, refilling it with fresh water. His expression was quiet, unreadable. Shem stood at the far end of the ark, arms crossed, watching the rain trickle through the wooden slats high above. And Shem was staring at the door. Noah exhaled slowly, then stepped forward. Gather around, he called softly. They turned toward him, their movements slow, reluctant. Noah waited as they came closer. His wife at his side, his sons before him, their wives just behind them. Their family. The only family left. The thought struck him harder than he expected. Tonight, he said, his voice steady, we do not look back. Shem flinched slightly but said nothing. We do not wonder what could have been, Noah continued. We do not question. We do not grieve for those who would not listen. He paused, letting the words settle. But we do pray, he finished. Naamah reached for his hand, her fingers tightening around his. Noah took a deep breath. We pray for the world we are leaving behind. And for the world we are about to enter. The family knelt together on the wooden floor. The flickering oil lamps cast a warm glow over their faces, but the storm outside had turned the world cold. Noah closed his eyes. Lord of heaven and earth, he began, his voice steady, you have called us to this moment. You have led us here through the years of labor, through the mockery, through the waiting. And now, as the waters rise, we trust in you. The wind howled against the ark, rattling the beams above. We do not understand all things, Noah continued, his voice softer now, but we know that your will is perfect. We know that you are just, that you are merciful, and that all things are in your hands. He felt his wife's fingers tighten around his. For those we leave behind, we ask for mercy. And for those within these walls, we ask for strength. A silence settled over them, thick and heavy. The only sound was the rain. Then Noah whispered, Amen. When he opened his eyes, Shem was already standing, his jaw tight. Is it really over? He asked, his voice quiet but sharp. Noah met his gaze. The waiting is over, he said. But the flood is just beginning. Shem exhaled sharply and turned away. Noah sighed, watching as his son disappeared into the depths of the ark. He understood the frustration, the helplessness. He had felt it too. Shem stood, slower, more hesitant. His eyes flickered toward the door again. Noah placed a hand on his shoulder. We move forward, Shem. Only forward. Shem nodded stiffly. But Noah saw the truth in his son's eyes. Shem was still listening for them, still waiting for the knocking that had not yet come. The night stretched on and the storm grew stronger. Noah sat near one of the lanterns, staring into the flame as it flickered against the wooden walls. He had spent years preparing for this moment. He had imagined it, prayed over it, spoken of it to the doubters who scoffed in his face. And yet, now that it had come, he felt none of the triumph he had expected. Only sorrow. His wife sat beside him, her presence warm and steady. "You're thinking about them," Naamah murmured. Noah swallowed. "I can't help it." She nodded, staring into the lantern's glow. "Neither can I." A long silence passed between them. Then she whispered, "Do you think any of them will come?" Noah closed his eyes. And in the distance, another crack of thunder split the sky. Chapter 8. The Deluge begins. The rain intensified, transforming from a steady downpour into a relentless torrent. The sound was deafening, a constant roar as water hammered against the ark's sturdy walls. Inside, the atmosphere grew tense, the once muted murmurs of animals now heightened to restless movements and anxious calls. Noah stood near a narrow window, peering into the storm. The world beyond was a blur of cascading water, the familiar landscape erased beneath the deluge. He could no longer see the city, nor the hills that once surrounded their home. "Father," Japheth's voice called from behind, barely audible over the storm's fury. Noah turned to see his son approaching, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "The lower compartments are secure," Japheth reported. "But the animals are growing agitated. The noise, it's unsettling them." Noah nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Japheth's shoulder. "Ensure they're as comfortable as possible. This will pass." Japheth hesitated, glancing toward the sealed door. "Do you think? Will anyone come?" Noah's heart ached at the question. He had hoped, prayed even, that as the rains began, those who had mocked and ignored the warnings would seek refuge. But as the waters rose, no desperate cries had pierced the storm, no frantic knocks echoed against the ark's hull. "I don't know," Noah admitted softly. "But we must be prepared regardless." Japheth nodded, though uncertainty clouded his eyes. He turned to tend to the animals, leaving Noah alone with his thoughts. The hours dragged on, each minute marked by the relentless pounding of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. Inside the ark, the family moved through their tasks with mechanical precision, their minds heavy with the weight of the unfolding catastrophe. Naamah approached Noah, her face pale but resolute. "The food stores are holding up," she reported. "But the humidity, it's causing some spoilage." Noah sighed, rubbing his temples. "Do what you can to preserve what remains. We'll need every bit in the days to come." She nodded, then hesitated, her eyes searching his. "Have you heard anything? From outside?" Noah shook his head. "Nothing. Just the storm." A shadow of sorrow crossed Naamah's face. "I keep thinking of them. Our neighbors, friends, all those lives." "So do I," Noah whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But we did all we could. The choice was theirs." As the days passed, the ark rocked gently on the swelling waters. The family established a routine, tending to the animals, rationing food, and offering prayers for the world they once knew. The constant motion and confined space tested their endurance, but they drew strength from each other and their faith. One morning, as the rain continued its unyielding assault, Shem approached Noah, his brow furrowed. "Father, the water, it's rising faster now." Noah followed him to a small observation slit. Through it, he saw the tops of trees disappearing beneath the churning surface. The realization struck him with renewed gravity. The world was being washed away. "Ensure everything is secured," Noah instructed. "We must be prepared for anything." As Shem set off to relay the instructions, Noah lingered by the slit, watching as the last remnants of the old world vanished beneath the floodwaters. A tear traced down his cheek, mingling with his unspoken prayers. Inside the ark, time became a blur. The distinction between day and night faded, replaced by the ceaseless rhythm of the storm. Conversations grew sparse, each family member lost in their reflections and silent supplications. On the 40th day, as the rain continued unabated, Noah gathered his family. They formed a circle, hands clasped, drawing solace from their unity. "We have endured much," Noah began, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "And we will endure more." But remember, this is not just an end. It's a beginning. A chance to rebuild, to honor the Creator with our lives. Shem squeezed his father's hand, offering a faint smile. We'll do it together. As they bowed their heads in collective prayer, the storm raged on, but within the ark, a seed of hope took root, nourished by faith and the promise of a new dawn. Chapter 9, The Waters Prevail. The ark drifted on an endless sea. Gone were the last remnants of the old world. The hills and valleys, the trees and streets, the marketplaces and homes, all swallowed beneath the vast, unbroken expanse of water. Noah stood at the narrow window, staring at the horizon. There was nothing but sky and sea, a boundless, overwhelming silence stretching in every direction. He had known this day would come. For decades he had warned them. For years he had pleaded. Now there was no one left to listen. Inside the ark, life carried on. It had been weeks since the rain had stopped, but the water remained, covering the world in a vast, restless ocean. The ark swayed with the rhythm of the waves, the creaking of the wooden beams blending with the occasional stirrings of the animals. The family had fallen into a quiet routine, feeding, cleaning, tending to the creatures that had been entrusted to them. It was work that kept their hands busy but did little to quiet their thoughts. Ham moved through the central chamber, securing the food stores. His jaw was clenched, his movements sharp. He had spoken little in the past few days, and Noah could see the frustration in his eyes. Is something wrong? Noah asked. Ham scoffed. Is something right? Noah exhaled. Tell me what troubles you. Ham turned to him, and for the first time Noah saw it, not just frustration but anger. This, Ham gestured around them, his voice tight. This endless waiting. This floating in the middle of nowhere. You said the waters would recede. But they haven't. Noah studied his son, searching for the deeper truth beneath his words. You do not doubt the Lord, do you? Ham hesitated. Then, after a long pause, he said, I don't know any more. Noah's chest tightened. Ham, we did what we were told. We built this ark. We gathered the animals. We left everything behind. And now? Ham's voice wavered. Now we sit here, waiting for land that may never come. Noah placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. It will come. Ham scoffed but did not pull away. You must have patience, Noah said softly. Ham shook his head. Patience is for men who know what they're waiting for. Noah sighed. Then what is it you are afraid of? Ham's jaw clenched. That we were spared for nothing. Noah felt the weight of those words settle over him. We were spared for a reason, he said. And we will know that reason when the time is right. Ham did not answer. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the narrow wooden corridor. Noah watched him go, sorrow pressing against his heart. Faith had carried them this far. But faith alone could not quiet a restless heart. Another week passed. Then another. Still, the waters stretched endlessly around them. The air inside the ark had grown thick, warm and damp, filled with the scent of hay and earth. The sounds of the animals were ever present, a reminder that life still endured, even as the world outside remained hidden beneath the flood. Japheth sat near the supply crates, sharpening a small blade against a whetstone. He was always the quiet one, the observer, but Noah could see the unease in his eyes. You are restless too, Noah noted. Japheth glanced up, his expression unreadable. It's been months, father. The rain has stopped, but the water remains. Noah nodded. It will recede. Japheth hesitated, then sighed. It is difficult to wait. Noah sat beside him. You were never meant to enjoy the waiting, my son. Japheth huffed a quiet laugh. That is reassuring. Noah smiled slightly. Waiting is an act of faith. The Lord did not promise us comfort. He promised us deliverance. Japheth studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then we wait. The night was still when Noah first heard it. A quiet rustling outside. The sound was faint, nearly swallowed by the gentle lapping of water against the ark's wooden hull. But he knew what it was. Something was out there. Noah rose quickly, moving toward the small window. He peered out, scanning the horizon. And then he saw it. A single white bird circling above the ark. His breath caught. A dove. Noah turned quickly, calling out to his sons. Come, all of you. The family gathered, eyes widening as they too saw the bird gliding through the open sky. Shem exhaled sharply. It survived. Noah nodded. Which means land is near. Shem stepped forward, watching as the dove fluttered closer, then veered away, disappearing into the distant clouds. "What do we do?" Japheth asked. Noah turned toward the small wooden cage beside him. Inside, another dove rested, blinking up at him with dark, knowing eyes. "We send a messenger of our own," Noah said. The family gathered at the window as Noah gently cradled the dove in his hands. Its feathers were soft beneath his fingers, its body small and warm. He whispered a quiet prayer. Then he released it. The bird flapped its wings, lifting into the air, soaring into the sky. They watched in silence as it disappeared beyond the horizon. And then all they could do was wait. The hours stretched on. The sun rose high. Then it began to fall. The sky darkened into evening, and still there was nothing. Naamah placed a gentle hand on Noah's shoulder. "Perhaps the waters have not yet receded enough." Noah nodded, though disappointment pressed heavily against his chest. "We will try again," he said. "We will not lose faith." His family murmured their agreement, though exhaustion and uncertainty hung over them like a shadow. They turned in for the night, the ark rocking gently with the movement of the water. Noah sat alone near the window, staring into the darkness. Had they not endured enough? Had they not waited long enough? He closed his eyes, breathing deeply. Faith. That was all that was left. And faith was enough. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, a fluttering sound stirred Noah from his sleep. He opened his eyes, blinking against the dim light. A shape moved near the window. Noah's breath caught. The dove had returned, and in its beak, clutched tightly, was a fresh olive leaf. A murmur of disbelief swept through the family as they gathered, staring at the small but unmistakable sign. Shem exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. "It found land." Japheth let out a slow breath. "We're going home." Noah lifted the olive leaf, staring at it, his hands trembling. A promise fulfilled. The waiting was nearly over. The waters were receding, and soon they would step into the new world. Chapter 10, The New Beginning. The ark drifted on calm waters. For the first time in months, the sky above was clear, the sun casting golden light across the endless sea. The rain was gone, the storm a memory, distant, like a dream slowly fading from the mind upon waking. Noah stood at the window, inhaling deeply. The air was different now, crisp, filled with the scent of renewal. The silence that had once been oppressive now felt like peace. Behind him, his family gathered, watching, waiting. The olive leaf lay on the wooden table, a symbol of hope in its purest form. "The waters are receding," Noah murmured. Shem stepped forward. "Then soon, we will return to land." Noah nodded. Yes. There was a weight in his voice, but it was no longer sorrow. It was something else. Something deeper. Responsibility. The waiting continued, but this time it was different. They were no longer waiting for destruction. They were waiting for life to return. Days passed. The sun rose higher, its warmth soothing against their weary souls. The animals grew more restless, sensing the shift. Birds tested their wings, pacing along the wooden beams, eager for open skies. And then, finally, the day came. Noah released the dove once more, watching as it soared into the sky. This time it did not return. A hush fell over the family as they realized what it meant. Shem exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. "The land is ready." Noah turned to them, his gaze strong, filled with quiet certainty. "Then it is time." The ark settled onto the earth. Not with a crash, not with force, but gently, like a leaf resting upon still water. Noah stepped onto the deck, staring out at the new world before him. The water had receded, revealing land untouched by human hands. The mountains stood tall in the distance, their peaks gleaming under the morning sun. The trees swayed in the gentle breeze, their branches stretching as if waking from a long slumber. It was quiet, but it was not empty. It was waiting. The door of the ark opened for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The animals moved hesitantly at first, blinking in the sunlight, stepping onto damp earth. Then, as if sensing the freedom, they surged forward, deer leaping, birds taking flight, lions stretching beneath the open sky. Noah watched them go, a deep warmth filling his chest. This was what they had been waiting for. This was why they had endured. Naamah stepped beside him, slipping her hand into his. She said nothing, but the relief in her eyes was enough. Japheth was already moving, examining the land, pointing toward the hills. Ham stretched, rolling his shoulders. I never thought I'd miss walking on solid ground. Shem remained quiet, gazing out at the horizon. It feels strange. Noah turned to his son. Because it is. The world they had known was gone. But this was a beginning. Noah knelt upon the ground. He pressed his hands into the damp earth, feeling the coolness beneath his fingers. A fresh world. A second chance. Slowly he gathered stones, building a small altar. His family joined him, one by one, standing around him as he raised his face toward the heavens. Lord, he whispered, his voice breaking, you have spared us. You have been faithful. You have given us life when all was lost. Tears burned in his eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of awe. We dedicate this land to you, Noah continued. We will walk in your ways. We will fill this earth as you have commanded. We will not forget. His voice wavered. We will remember. As he spoke, a shift came in the air. A presence. Something unseen but felt. Then a light stirred above them, a rainbow stretching across the sky, colors shimmering in the fading mist. A sign. A covenant. The first promise of a new world. Noah rose, staring up at the sky, his heart full. His family stood beside him, eyes lifted toward the heavens, their faces bathed in golden light. Hope had taken root. And so, hand in hand, they stepped forward, into the new world, into the new beginning. Thank you for joining me on this original telling of the Bible story of Noah's Ark. Please like this video and consider subscribing to our channel to join our community and for more videos like this. Now I wish you a peaceful and blessed sleep, and I'll see you on the next video. May God bless you.